So I'd like to ask you two questions. The first is related to the closeness between pain and orgasm. And I would like to know if you think we are allowed to infer further implication about the eroticism, I mean, about more complex erotic situation, like, for example, sadomasochism. And the second question is regarding asexuality. What do you think about asexuality, if you have any thought on this topic? I think iPhone sexuality.
iPhone.
Okay.
Asexuality.
Asexuality.
Okay.
Is it clear?
The alpha
Okay.
privative.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
so firstly, I don't know if I completely got your question, if it started in English and then in Italian in the translation, but I don't have any more to say about pain and orgasm. I don't have anything more to say about pain and orgasm than Barry did earlier, which is that the remarkable thing is that the system that produces desire also has an analgesic effect, and that's a good thing, because sometimes the moving together of body parts can be a little bit painful. Now, what I don't know is about individual differences and about sadomasochism, for example, and whether the attachment, the feelings of desire and attachment are overwhelming the sensations of pain, and the extent to which this needs the power exchange relationship that we have in BDSM. So I talked to Barry this morning about it because I think it would be a great research area, but I don't know anything on the topic, and he didn't suggest, if he's in the room here somewhere. I don't know if you want to say anything more, Barry, but you only can if you're on the audio, because otherwise you won't be on the internet. He needs a microphone, though.
Yeah, but there is another microphone, right?
Where is the microphone?
To Barry.
And then I'll answer the second question later.
Yeah, okay, great.
Thank you. Yes. As Oliver said, there's very little research on BDSM. We really don't know whether people who, there are several possibilities. People who engage in it, possibly they have a higher pain threshold. That's one possibility. That's a sort of a trivial possibility, probably unlikely. But there's also the possibility that they have a safe signal. So if the intensity gets too high, they can stop it. So it's not really, maybe it's not really pain. It's almost to pain, but then if it gets aversive, they stop it. And it doesn't go any further, any more intense. Another possibility is that the expectation of painful experience, if there's the anticipation of pleasure or anticipation of some benefit, it's tolerable. We go to a dentist, we have a tooth drilled, knowing that it's going to be better in the future if we undergo that pain. So the expectation of pain, or knowing that we're going to jump into a cold ocean, it's going to be aversive at first, but we like the idea, so we can prepare ourselves for what would otherwise be painful, or would be painful under a different context. So it can be probably very complex, and different things for different people. And of course, then there's also the possibility that people who engage in that kind of activity, somehow there's some crossed wiring, and they get pleasure out of pain. You know, so really nobody knows. As far as, I mean, there's no real research on it.
Thanks, Barry. I mean, I'm glad to hear that your take was roughly the same as mine. So then the other one was asexuality, is that right? So, I mean, the first thing is, I think it's real. You know, when it was originally reported as a sort of 1 or 2% phenomenon in the Masters and Johnson work in 50 years ago or so. When we did our erogenous zone work 10 years ago, we got about those sorts of numbers. You know, 1 to 2% of people just reported that it wasn't very interesting having their genitals touched. I couldn't believe it, but you know, the numbers seem to suggest it. I don't know anything about the neurobiology of asexuality and why it's reported like that. I presume there must be a biological basis for it, but I honestly don't know what that might be. I think it's a very interesting question.
If I may add something, maybe it's useful to, let's say, to adopt or shift the model that Barry proposed to us, this inhibition and excitations model, like for the orgasm, and to use it also for other, let's say, basic emotions. For example, the need of attachment. So there is lust, there is attachment, there is panic. All the 7 systems, let's say, they could work on parallel, actually, not only single one. Then you could have a sort of symphony, which could explain a lot of behaviors, in the sense that maybe, for example, as I proposed, the need of attachment, of a safe relationship, could be so strong that you can accept also pain in the relationship. It's fine. It's a good bargain, let's say. That could be an explanation. And Claudia, you have...
There's a question here from the audience online, and it asks if it is possible in this case that it is at play the identification with the aggressor. It doesn't say to whom it is directed.
I'm just a humble neuroscientist. I can't answer that question.
I'm an humble psychoanalyst.
I'm a gynecologist.
But identification has to do with safety, of course. Especially if the aggressor is something that is providing care and attachment. I have 2 options. One is completely not possible to pursue it. That is to fight with the same person. So I just identify. I mean, the explanation on this sense is, from the clinical point of view, is quite consistent. But we do not have still, I guess, the basic science support.
I will say something else, which actually touches on what Barry said this morning, but I have exactly the same position, which is we have to think of running multiple basic emotion systems at the same time, and that some brain areas, probably in the upper brainstem, are adding them all together in some interesting way to produce an overall feeling of pleasure or unpleasure. And that means that we have to listen carefully to our patients to see what their trade-off is, because no decisions that we make in life are perfect. All of them will be bad for some basic emotion, but so long as in the end that you end up with a positive bank balance, then people are probably able to tolerate a great deal. So I don't know if that's a similar answer to yours.
Davide Rosso del centro di Pavia. Una domanda per Rosa Spagnolo, che ha, diciamo, sintetizzato 100 anni di psicanalisi in maniera estremamente vivida e chiara, però non sono riuscito verso la fine ad acchiappare un concetto, per cui le chiederei se è possibile di esplicitarlo e di ripeterlo, che è quello del desiderio secondo il suo punto di vista, e sembrava che cercasse anche, se ho capito bene, di connetterlo con il sé. Ora, se è possibile, ti chiederei di insomma, sintetizzare o eventualmente riprendere questo tema che non sono riuscito a acchiappare verso la fine del tuo interessante intervento. Il desiderio e il sé.
He's asking about the desire and the self, and just can say this: the self is, in my opinion, regarding to me and my book, the self is the glue who keep together a lot of function, because it is formed and informed by multisensory integration. So the self means, the building of the self means to be in the world, no? Because multiple integration, multisensory integration means be in the world. Okay, it means perception. And then the self keep together all our memory, all our neuropsychological function, and all our other function. And this glue, I call the self, is always in the world. And this expectancy is the world wants me, it's like they wanted, and I go to the world, and my expectation is I can find something in the world, and the world can find me, okay? This is the desire. I want to go out, and at the same time, the world coming in. This is the desire, this is expectation, this is the time of the self. In this sense, the time of the self lasting from the past to the present to the future. And this is desire. No?
Yeah. So again, I'm a humble neuroscientist, and the concept of the self is too complicated for me. But I can talk about personality, which is the individual variations in the nature of the self. The work from Costa and McRae across the last few decades, the 5-factor model, is interesting, but it's not a good way in for affective neuroscience. And we have seen in the last decade or two a way of integrating affective neuroscience with individual differences in personality. And Jaak Panksepp's last book with Ken Davis, in fact the book published just after his death, is an attempt to try to synthesize that work and allows us to see how the different basic emotion systems might map onto variations in personality. And that, I think, is interesting. We haven't got a complete answer yet, but at least we can see the shape of the problem, would be my opinion.
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Turnbull. I'm over here. In your talk, you addressed the before and after orgasm. I'm wondering if your research also addresses orgasm, and if not, why? Is it just too complicated at the neurophysiological level?
I mean, firstly, I think there are only so many players on the football field, and I don't see how a new team can be introduced just for the brief period of time that is orgasm. What we do know is that the before chemistries are going uphill in mountain terms, until orgasm, and we know that the after chemistries are starting at the top of the hill and coming down. Some of them perhaps at different trajectories. So it's not an unreasonable hypothesis that it's the same team of players. It's just that everyone is on the field running as fast as they can at the same time. But I'm no expert on that literature. I just come at it from the affective neuroscience side. I want to identify who the players on the field are. And I suggested six players, if that's the right way of describing it. I don't know if Barry has any thoughts on that one. If you want to give him the ball to carry on that football analogy.
Yes, I have a sort of a question, an observation about the idea of chemistries that you're referring to, and certainly the chemistries have influence on the feelings, but I think all neuroscientists would agree that anything that we perceive, any feelings that we have, is due to neuron activity, the activity of neurons. And neurons can only do one thing. They can only fire faster, slower, or not at all. So, and probably what the chemicals do is they affect different sets of neurons. So it's not the chemistry, it's not the chemicals that are producing the feelings. It's the chemicals are affecting different neural systems, and it's the different neural systems that are producing the different feelings. And so the different feelings are probably a result of different experiences that we have. The experiences perceived as coming from different bodily experiences. I mean, that's where the body and mind come in. That we know what we know through our experiences of bodily responses. So, and the chemicals are influencing which neural system is involved. So, don't we have to try to account for the different feelings on the basis of which neural systems are being activated or inhibited, or both?
I think that's a great comment and answer, and it opens another possibility here. So if you look at the brain systems underpinning emotions, the core argument, the upper brainstem, the PAG, is, as Jaak always said, the area in which you get the highest amount of emotional experience for the lowest voltage when you do brain stimulation experiments. So it's possible that orgasm is so much more heightened versus others in that the chemistries do a better job of targeting upper brainstem for 20 seconds, or however long it lasts for you, that it's the same work on a different place, and we can only manage that for a brief period of time, which would be another solution to the magnitude problem, in which orgasm feels so much more powerful. But I presume you agree, Barry, that there are only so many players in the game. Chemically, there are only that half a dozen or something like that.
Actually, there are more than half a dozen. There are probably dozens of neuropeptides.
I should have said half a dozen that we understand anything
that we
about.
know, exactly. Yes, I mean, it's easy to identify them with immunohistochemistry. We can identify dozens of neurotransmitters, but we only know the function of a handful.
So, Professor Turnbull, I also have a question for you, if I can.
Another question.
Here?
Okay.
Oops, sorry.
All right.
So, I think this is going to be an easier question. So, I agree with your observation that there's a lack of attention on sex research on the feelings associated with sexual response and the different phases that characterizes it. However, in some cases, researchers attempted to get to the subjective feelings and mental pleasure experienced by the participants on a research context, on a lab. But the only way that they did that, so far at least, to make data analyzable, I guess, has been by using Likert scales. So my question is, do you have any suggestions or ideas on how to measure feelings in their complexity in a research context, maybe avoiding Likert scales and just asking, like, how much pleasure did you feel on a scale from 1 to 10? Because that seems pretty reductive.
Yeah, this is not the time for a discussion about quantitative versus qualitative research. But my usual answer to that is you can do both. You can ask a number out of people. You can also ask them to describe the nature, the nature of the experience, and you can try to correlate that with the physiological data as well, if that's possible. I mean, people do describe. In fact, Barry this morning talked about the ways in which different sorts of stimulation were subjectively reported very differently. I thought, was it the shower of stars or something?
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
I would like a bit more of that in my life. Would be really quite exciting. So my only suggestion would be both, but without the numbers, it's very hard to compare across people, I suppose. But it doesn't stop you from asking qualitative questions. I don't know if that's a good enough answer for you.
Yeah.
But I hope you do the research whichever way you gather the data.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the best way.
Yeah. How satisfied were you with the talk on a scale of 1 to 10? That's. But thank you.
Anyway, psychoanalysis is about exactly that, description. possibly closer to the maximum, to the real experience of the person, at least his narrative or her narrative. And this is data. It's something that we can discard. We have to take into account first-person perspective. That's also the point.
No, volevo anch'io, tanto abbiamo la traduzione, andare su questo punto, che è lo stesso problema che abbiamo rispetto al dolore. Quando facciamo i protocolli di ricerca rispetto al dolore, il problema è la qualità del dolore, la quantità del dolore, a quel punto bisogna decidere cosa fare. Così come per altri protocolli di ricerca in cui proviamo a quantizzare qualcosa, perché dobbiamo avere i dati, però poi arriva il momento in cui sulla qualità, sui quali, come dicevo prima, poi cadiamo. Per questo io mi chiedo poi se alla fine il concetto di affetto è rimasto legato a un'energia, perché è più facile in questo modo anche inserirlo nella ricerca, mentre diventa più complicato quando arriviamo a parlare di qualità, perché nella qualità il sistema è molto più complesso da indagare e poi ci si pone il problema del punto di vista soggettivo, di cosa stiamo parlando, della first person perspective. Vabbè, comunque è tutto un altro discorso.
Anyway, we could also think that in the future, like has happened for orgasm, we will find a biomarker that is oxytocin. So the description of the person, the first person perspective, match with the objective word of science, no? So this person is describing an orgasm, and actually we have a marker in the body saying, yes, it's happening. No, that's an example. There is a person, one here, and then the other one, and then we have to stop. Two persons.
Yes, the question is a little bit philosophical. Do we agree that human being is, according to the theory of chaos, basically representing a case of a heavy chaos, consisting of multiple elements that are all chaotical?
No.
No. Why?
No, to sample this. No, because no, in italiano, ok, sorry. Vabbè, in italiano, va bene, dai. Se no facendo lo switch fra le due lingue è complicato. Quando parliamo di essere umano, è un sistema così complesso per cui ci diventa veramente difficile ridurlo sia ai sistemi complessi, a tutte le teorizzazioni sui sistemi complessi, perché c'è sempre qualcosa di non predicibile, unpredictable, per cui noi non siamo mai né nel massimo del caos né al minimo del caos. Questo è l'essere umano, il mantenersi su quella linea in cui non è mai al massimo del caos perché si degrada il sistema, non è al minimo del caos perché altrimenti non funzioniamo. Ti dico di più, è proprio su questa linea di equilibrio che sorge l'umano e sorge il cambiamento. È su questa linea di equilibrio che continuamente proviamo a sopravvivere.
Did you get it? More or less? Yes. More or less.
I'm learning, yes.
Yeah. It's about a difficult equilibrium between entropic state and negentropic state. In between. And if we are too stable, of course, we cannot be enough creative in order to survive. No? Of course. If you are too chaotic, we just dissipate, as they say.
I was just referring that maybe there is no point in trying to reduce the human being to either to neurons or only to chemistry. There is a symbiotic background. So
Symbiotic is a great word. I do agree. With other species as well, not alone. L'ultima domanda alla signora. It's yours. La tua è l'ultima, eh? Vuoi? Adesso il microfono.
Avevo due domande velocissime per i due professori e uno per la professoressa. Allora, la prima è: perché il dolore, su cui si sa ancora molto poco, l'orgasmo vince sul dolore su cui si sa ancora molto poco. Forse non è perché il sistema di cura è un sistema più potente di tutti gli altri, perché in tutte le forme di attaccamento c'è liberazione di ossitocina. Allora il sistema di cura vince sull'ansia, sulla rabbia, sulla paura. Noi ci butteremmo nel fuoco per salvare un figlio o una persona cara. Allora c'è fortunatamente questo sistema importante per andare avanti nella vita, per la procreazione.
È una
e
domanda
per
e
la
una
sopravvivenza.
risposta questa.
No, voglio sapere se è possibile questo.
Sì, sì.
Poi volevo fare una domanda alla professoressa Spagnolo. Lei dice che il concetto di pulsione è stato messo un po' da parte per la questione del pansessualismo freudiano. Io penso invece che non è proprio questo, perché solo gli stupidi possono parlare ancora di pansessualismo freudiano, su cui Freud poi è molto chiaro. Molto probabilmente perché invece sono stati accantonati altri concetti collegati, come il complesso edipico, no? Perché è difficile trovare oggi un complesso edipico nelle famiglie che sono così cambiate, mutate, dove questi padri non ci sono più, le donne sono le costellazioni familiari sono cambiate. Forse magari è dovuto a questo. Lei cosa pensa?
Brevemente un altro no. No, mi dite di essere breve, io so chiara, non mi piacciono i giri di parole. No, perché il modello pulsionale, sessuale, freudiano è un modello, piglia e porta a casa. Non è che dici questo mi piace, questo non mi piace, ma questo questo lo tengo, quello lo butto. Se accetti il concetto di sessualità come lui dall'inizio fino alla fine l'ha descritta, diventa complicato poi andare a fare le pulci al sistema e dire però sai se lo riporta all'attaccamento questo varia. No, c'è una componente di pansessualismo per cui la psicanalisi è stata rifiutata. L'unico modo di rientrare in questo modello, e se rifiuti quello, rifiuti l'Edipo, rifiuti la precura, rifiuti tutta una serie di cose, sono tutte tra di loro collegate, non le puoi scollegare. Già è stato difficile scollegare la libido da tutto il resto, già è difficile scollegare l'affetto dall'energia, figuriamoci il modello sessuale completo. Se, come dire, noi stiamo provando a fare è capire se all'interno di tutto questo si possono articolare in maniera più basic. Noi siamo tornati alla base, dicendo, parlando di strutture, parlando di sé, siamo tornati dietro, andiamo ancora prima, vediamo cosa succede e poi ci mettiamo i contenuti. Questa è la differenza fra quello che diciamo noi e tutto il resto. Noi stiamo parlando e anche le neuroscienze parlano di strutture della mente, laddove il modello psicanalitico parla di contenuti della mente. Prima e seconda topica sono contenuti della mente, la mente nevrotica è un contenuto della mente. Noi stiamo dicendo a tutti gli psicanalisti, me stessa compresa, non guardiamo solo ai contenuti perché non ci serve lavorare sui contenuti, dobbiamo cambiare le strutture e se cambiamo le strutture è tutt'altro linguaggio. Sono stata chiara?
Chiarissimo. Okay, that's the end of this session. I have to... of course, sorry.
I will try to answer it very quickly. I think you're thinking of two completely separate effects here. I think the flooding of the brain by those positive after chemicals are in themselves intrinsically pleasurable. They're pleasant just on their own. Having opiates are just nice. Secondly, opiates also produce analgesic effects, reducing pain elsewhere, which Barry talked about this morning. And I think that they both contribute to the fact that we can overcome potentially painful feelings from things scratching together at orgasm, would be my quick answer.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of this session, and we will start immediately with the following one. So, thank you for your attention and for the claps. So I invite you, Heribert and Katie, to join me at the table. We have now 4 distinguished guests that will talk about the topic. And the title of the presentation, each of you have 15 minutes each. I do remember you. Okay. And the title of this discussion, I will say, or presentations of comments, is New Perspective on Neuroscience, Psychoanalysis, and Research. If you want to just briefly introduce yourself, you will give me a favor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this chance to talk to you. I can introduce myself. My name is Herbert Blass. I'm from Germany. I'm working in a private practice in Germany, and I'm a psychoanalyst for adults, children, and adolescents. I'm a training analyst of the German Association, of the International Association as well, of course. And at the moment, I'm also the president of the European Psychiatric Federation. So perhaps I think this should be enough.
It's enough.
Yeah. And then really it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm also very grateful to be invited and to have the chance to talk with you about this very interesting topic, and also about perhaps some aspects of the future of the IPA, of our thoughts about the future of the IPA. So, of course, I cannot just repeat what all has been said about the meaning of neuropsychoanalysis. I can say that I'm personally very, very much convinced about the meaning and of the importance of neuropsychoanalysis for our world, and also between the connection of psychoanalysis and neuroscience in general. I think because it's very important for psychoanalysis, because also it places psychoanalysis, I would call it, at the crossroads of our contemporary world, and also between several sciences. I think it's very important that we as psychoanalysts don't live a life just outside the world of sciences in general, and also not totally outside from the university. I think we need this connection to this world. And I think that just, especially neuropsychoanalysis, just gives us the chance and the offer to be connected with this world. And I think this morning and also this afternoon has shown the enormous importance of this. And also it's very important just to be known from the public, in the public, that we as psychoanalysts don't exclude ourselves, that we are not living in the ivory tower, to use this very known, very famous image, but that we are living in our contemporary world. And so I don't want, perhaps you remember there has been a very severe discussion, also fierce discussion some years ago in the International Journal of Psychoanalysis about the meaning, the importance of neuropsychoanalysis or not. So there are some psychoanalysts who were, perhaps still are, I don't know, very much against it and say it's nothing to do with psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis is about fantasy, yeah, and about our thinking, which I totally agree, of course. But just today we learned again that there is always a connection between body and thinking, body and mind. And think this is what I want just to repeat and underline, that neuropsychoanalysis helps us just to get over this old dichotomy of body and mind. So it's very important that we just conceptualize the whole psyche of the human as an entity which is not divided. And I think this is clear. This is I think it's not something which is new to you, but I think it's important to keep this in mind. So I think, and this is my interest also in neuropsychoanalysis, how is it possible to find always the bridges between bodily feelings and imaginations and thought and the creation of fantasy, and also to have not only one way from the body to the mind, but also from the mind to the body. And this is because this has something to do, I can only mention this briefly, with perhaps what Freud called the complementary series on one end, and also what we now today call epigenetics. So this is something which is very important for us as psychoanalysts. And perhaps as I was so, I was really amazed by all the lectures today. I want to say I have published several articles. I've worked especially on male sexuality and the paternal function in children, adolescents, and also adult men, mainly men. Unfortunately, these papers are published more or less in German, but I want to come for our purposes today to two of these aspects, and I want to combine this with the themes of today, because I have written a paper which in German it's called Der beste Sex ist der im Kopf. I translated, the best sex is the one in the head. And just to make it brief, it was about a patient, and I have other patient, a male patient, who had always the best pleasure with pornography, yeah, and also who had every time he was married, every time when he had intercourse with his wife, he had to leave the wife and to go to the toilet and to masturbate. And he always said that the masturbation was much more pleasurable than the intercourse. And he came to this, let's say, sentence to say the best sex is in the head, it's not in the relation. And I think this was his problem. It was, and I was very, let's say, excited today to hear about these findings that Professor Komisaruk told us, that there is the possibility that thinking about sexuality might create more arousal in the brain than to have the experience. I think that this was something which we heard today. And I think that this is very interesting for me. I would talk about this more, but just with respect to my patient, I can only say that my understanding, and then our understanding of this problem, was that he only, by withdrawing himself to himself, had the only possibility to have more fantasies for his own. So in the intercourse with his wife, of course, there was a lot of anxiety, yeah, a lot of fear of women, fear of intrusion, but so he was not able to have any kind of fantasy. In the moment, yeah. So the possibility to have fantasies came back only when he retreated, yeah. And this is something which I just worked with him on psychologically, but listening to these findings today, I would be very interested how we can understand this also from a neuropsychological point of view. In the transference, it was very important just to work on the question where I was experienced as an intrusive object. Yeah? So in the way when it was possible more and more in the transference, that he also could gain more space for himself in thinking and feeling, then he more and more became able also to go into a relationship with less anxiety. And just to make it short, this also was very helpful for his relationship to his wife, and also for the decrease of this retreat into pornography. Just a short, yeah. Another aspect which I want to tell you, because today we are more or less, which we often do in psychoanalysis, are talking about the mothers, which I appreciate. But you know, there are also fathers. And sometimes there are also some fathers. No, what I also find very important, and this was striking for me since a lot of time, I think you know that once a man decides by thinking to become a father, then his biology changes. I think this is very important. It's not the way that the biology just drives us as men, yeah, just so in the way, oh, we have no other chance, we have to become a father, oh, sorry, or something like this. No, it's just the other way around. Once we decide, I want to become a father, then one could say the male brain transforms into a paternal brain. Yeah? And this is also related to oxytocin. I think there would be more possibilities just to talk about it, but it's very important that man is becoming a paternal person, of course, with his fantasies, with his relation to the partner, and just of course, but also with relation to his hormonal status. And so that in a way the testosterone, as far as I know, in a way for a certain period of time reduces, the oxytocin increases and helps the man and helps the couple to become a parental couple. What then is of course important that also the man can also return in a way to find a balance between the parental brain and the male brain. Yeah? So this sometimes, you know, this has also very clinical implications for us. We know this, that after the birth of a child, not only women lose interest in sexuality, only men, also men. Because one is of course the fear of a woman who gave birth to a child. But I think also there is a lot combined with also the fear to become too aggressive. But it's very important just also to return as a man to a kind of balance, I would call it, balance between paternal and male function, which is not a contradiction, but I just want to tell this to you to make the difference. The different system, we're talking about systems.
Yeah, 2 more
minutes.
Yeah.
2 more minutes. Okay, so then I will close very. I want to just because you asked the question whether psychoanalysis needs a new, what's the question, neuropsychoanalytic approach to sexology, I would say yes. I could elaborate on it more, but I would answer this just. And what I want to finish with this, because this is also important for the future. I am very, very grateful to neuropsychoanalysts, also to Mark Solms, who always is telling this, that the method of neuropsychoanalysis to see that it's very important that we are working on our memory systems, and that it is only possible to rework memory systems and to find new memory systems and to change in psychic transformation. It is only done by frequent repetition. And at the same time, not only repetition, but to make new experiences in the consulting room, which is also a sensory consulting room. It's not only thinking, it's a mixture of sensory and thinking. And this is a strong argument for our way of high-frequency psychoanalysis. Yeah? I don't want to say it as a dogma, but I think it's very important to understand, and we can explain, this is something which is important, we can explain other science, we can explain to the public why it's important and necessary to have these long processes of psychoanalysis. Because people ask us, why are you going so long? We can say, for this reason.
It needs time to change.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. So present yourself a bit at least.
So my name is Katie Bogliato. I'm a psychoanalyst, training psychoanalyst from the Belgian Psychoanalytical Society, child psychiatrist, and I'm here, and I think what we are trying to do today is trying to understand how to live, trying to understand how human people live in an environment. And I think that the day that we had today, as Spadazzi opened and introduced the days, just opening questions, but very important questions. And I think it's what we've been doing today, it's an example of the importance of interdisciplinary dialogue and a meeting of people from different cultures, different formations, and putting together the knowledge and putting together also what we still don't know. Because I was also, it's not, I admire also, it's very important to accept that we still don't know what happen. And putting together the knowledge of neuropsychoanalysis with psychoanalysis, trying to think the connection and of the meeting between patients and analysts, and having in mind what can transform in the brain, what's happening, not in the relationship, in the psychoanalytical relationship, and keeping in mind that there is also the body and the sensorial traces, as Professoressa Spagnol had also introduced with the paper of the first interactions between the dyad or the triad between parent and infant, and also before that, what happens during the pregnancy. It's also a bath of sensoriality between the baby and the womb and what's happening, and trying to put together how we can continue to build up our concepts and enrich our psychoanalytical concepts without throwing away where we come from, and that's what you said also, Spagnola, not throwing away previous concepts, but keeping open and keeping in mind that with research it can also open up new understandings, new psychoanalytical understandings. And working, and I just forgot to say that I worked for more than a decade in a medically assisted reproductive service. Of course, the theme of sexuality, of reproduction is part of my questions, and new patients arrive with wanting to build up new families, and there are patients with asexuality, but also having a desire of parenthood, having a desire of motherhood or fatherhood, opens up new questions and new paradigms to try to understand how to survive, how to live in an environment, in a society, in a collectivity, and putting together a knowledge, and continue to try and ask questions and keeping open the fact that we still don't know everything, and there is also some mysteries. Thank you.
Okay, let's switch the couple. Bye. Harry, yes. Bernard, please, and Rotro as well. Maybe you want to talk first, since we are shifting couple, we can shift the order as you like. You will prefer. Okay. You will make the conclusions.
Thank you.
Do you want to speak in French?
No, she asked me to speak in English, so I will do. Yes. Good evening to every of you. I am very happy to be with you here. I wrote in my habits, I wrote a short text, and I will read it to you. The organizer thought I have to speak in French, but not to change. We will have the text in English, and I will speak in English. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here in Rome again, with so many Italian friends and colleagues with whom I have had the opportunity working for a long time already. And soon we will be meeting again in Naples. I have very vivid memories of the Congress of French-speaking psychoanalysts in Rome, Milan, Genoa, of the French-Italian in Bologna, Palermo, Rome, and of numerous other invitations. The announcement of today's conference is very attractive. The theme and the words of the title evoke the origin of the psychoanalysis, the Platon pseudos, the hysterical lie, and the first work on the sexuality of ills by Freud. So I was very glad when Claudia and Rosa invite us, Rotot de Klerk, and I to participate as guests. Of course, it was our candidacy for the presidency and vice presidency of the IPA that earned us this honor. We thank them both, all the organizers and all of you gathered together today. Now I am supposed to introduce myself and tell you a few words about my relationship to our science as a psychoanalyst. I suppose that the title that the organizers wrote on the program about novelty in neuroscience was a kind of joke from them. This short text is for both, Rotraut and me, of us, with the agreement of her. I am a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist too. I trained in psychiatry a few years after the differentiation of neuropsychiatry into two specialties, psychiatry on one hand, neurology on the other hand. Then I continued along my path towards psychoanalysis, since this is what I wanted to do when I decided to study medicine and psychiatry. During my years of training, I therefore distanced myself from the medical science in favor of metapsychology, and I keep it very important for me. This led to psychoanalysis being heavily criticized and accused of sorry, I thought I go too quick. And I was, by working on this, by exploring Freudian thought more deeply, both with patients at the level of theorizing, that I re-encountered the various science and, of course, neurology and biology. I also experienced the time when all fields of culture were deemed to fall within the purview of psychoanalysis. This led to psychoanalysis being heavily criticized and accused of psychoanalysis. Since then, a better differentiation at its good way of our respective fields has been re-established. At the same time, studies in psychosomatics brought to light the close entanglement between the mental and somatic spheres, and reflection on the creation of the body as forms of libidinal cathexes. Since then, psychoanalysis has engaged in debates with other fields of culture as today, in particular neuroscience and biology, but also with physics and epigenetics, etc. Having been trained as a scientist, my interest in the science has never waned, and I have remained a subscriber to various journals such as La Recherche and the Science volume of the Encyclopedia Universalis since my youth. So, certain questions arise. What can other science fields bring to psychoanalysis? Why should psychoanalysis be interested in other science and other fields of culture? Is it only a question of curiosity? Great. And the pleasure of learning? Great also. And knowing? Great again. In fact, no. It's not only that. Within the Paris Society, during my 2 terms as president, I developed scientific committees and then created a research unit, the Commission for Research and Development in Psychoanalysis, which I have continued to run with a small group of colleagues for 8 years now. In this unit, as I explained during a lecture at the British Society, we receive specialists from other cultural fields than ours, be it science, art, literature, and many other cultural fields such as history, sociology, politics. In the Congress of French-speaking psychoanalysts that I have been running for 8 years, I have also included in the program guests guests who are not psychoanalysts and who come to speak to us about their own research and their methodology, about the epistemology of their approach, including, of course, authors from foreign countries, such as Carlo Ginzburg for history, or the late Mauro Mancia on implicit memory, and many other authors. Not only Italian, but Italian. This is just to say how much I want to continue to focus on metapsychology and to maintain close contact with the other science and field of culture. Beyond the pleasure of knowledge, it is a process of research in psychoanalysis that can't take place without this proximity. Very important. My question now becomes clear. What is it that is specific to the epistemology of psychoanalysis and differentiates it from that of the other sciences? It does not have the competence to retrace the history and major currents of epistemology, not to take up the contribution of neuroscience and the rapprochements that have been attempted between our disciplines, nor the polemic concerning them. I am thinking, for example, of Edelman's re-entries on the operation of the après-coup, and of the two-stage process of human sexuality for today. The two-stage process of human sexuality, of mirror neurons, emotion and affect, neuronal plasticity, and then integration of novelty, discontinuity, contingency, self-organization, and of the irreducible singularity that attempts to unite neuroscience and psychoanalysis. All these studies are grouped together within what we call the science of complex system, which stresses the unpredictability of the emergences. This is the case with successful dream. Their result is unpredictable, unlike traumatic dreams. I will simply make a few remarks centered on the scientific corpus of psychoanalysis while trying to show how metapsychology can't evolve without making such detours through the other fields of the culture. Making detours is inherent to the development of mental life and part of psychoanalytical epistemology. One element seems to separate us radically from the other science, and I would want to have a great debate about that, and that is the use of interpretation in the psychoanalytical sense of the term. That is to say, the leap made by interpretation between totally heterogeneous realities. Those that are tangible and manifest, with the other is a non-tangible reality, the reality of lack, that gives rise to imaginary theories. In fact, interpretation is one of the vertices of thought. Thought is interpreting, it is theorizing. Psychoanalysis considers that something that manifests itself tangibly in one area has a meaning in relation to another reality that is only accessible through such a leap. How, at a rational level, can one pass from the deprivation that brings together the two women friends in the dream of the unsuccessful supper party, the so-called dream of the beautiful butcher's face, wife, by Lacan, one depriving herself of caviar, the other of salmon, how we can pass of this symptom to the Oedipal link that unites each of them to their father, without introducing an irrational theory according to which the deprivation is, in a concealed manner,
Slow down a little bit because it's too fast. Yeah. No. So you were too fast. Slow down a little bit.
It's for my pleasure. So, the link between this two deprivation and the Oedipal link that unites each of them to their father without introducing an irrational theory according to which the deprivation is, in a counseled manner, an hallucinatory fulfillment of an Oedipal desire. And taking a step further, how can we integrate the reality of lack with the science insofar as it does not give rise to any traces? No image, no pictures, only words and feelings. The experience of lack is dealt with by the mind by means of content that are not specific to it and which come from tangible realities. Only the psychoanalytical corpus recognizes that interpreting thought has the value of a concept. The introduction of irrational logic, rational, within the metapsychological corpus leads some scientists, but not all, to keep up at arm's length, and some psychoanalysts to look for firmer ground in other sciences at a time when the latter, under the influence of quantum physics, are increasingly committed to recognizing that the irrational sphere belongs to the scientific sphere. It is therefore the definition of the notion of science that is evolving. Our reading of Freud allows us to realize that Freud did not cease, in the course of his theorization, to refer to other fields of culture and to come back to metapsychology via this path. It is not just a question of his curiosity, but of a detour that contributes to the foundation of metapsychology. I need to no more than mention in passing the scope and diversity of the field to which he refers, ranging from thermodynamics, chemistry, physics, medicine, anthropology, linguistics, art, literature, painting, mythology, poetry, politics, etc. From yes, but it was not. It just to show. It was so to show. From his earliest writings in the project, he uses the schema of synapses to depict a free association. Later, he represents the interaction of the topography first by a closed schema, closely resembling the cerebral areas, as today we saw, then by an open schema opening the regression to infinity, which Bion was to take up by means of the regression to O. Finally, in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, he looks into the biology of regeneration and cellular immortality in order to enrich the economic point of view of metapsychology and to explore the delicate question of the libidinal regeneration of the mind. The processes involved appear to him analogously linked to those of biology, the problem of the regeneration of the libido and the desire. This detour that the other science is in fact the way in which psychic processes are established from childhood and which then continue in our interest in culture. Winnicott has continually linked play and culture. This was how Freud's grandson transposed onto the wooden reel the string, his arms, and his four and da sounds, the psychic process that enabled him to build up his maternal function in the absence of his mother, and thus to separate himself from her. During this detour via play, the child researcher makes discoveries about space, matter, body, force. At the end of his life, Freud wrote that this is how scientific views of the external world emerged. You all remember his famous statement, space maybe the projection of the extinction of the psychical apparatus. No other derivation is probable. Instead of Kant's a priori determinant of our psychical apparatus, psyche is extended, knows nothing about it. Freud thus recognizes that this projection of transposition of unconscious elements on the external onto the external reality is at the origin of the conceptualization of space. I applied the same formula to time, based on the discontinuity of libidinal cathexes. Psyche is intermittent, knows nothing about it. Hence, the elaboration of the notion of time. It's again this transposition that becomes transference in the session and allows for the establishment of the otherness of the object in the world.
1 minute left.
Yes, it's good. It's also the same mechanism that takes place very early and toward the Nebenmensch, the fellow human being with whom the children identifies from birth. There is therefore no existence, no knowledge, no science without transference. It is this mechanism of transposition involved in the very foundation of the mind that is used by every researcher. It makes it possible first to establish knowledge of the external world and can be continued by an elaboration of meta-psychology. Psychoanalysis is a second science that needs to make a detour via the other fields of culture in order to build itself. This is how Freud made use, sometimes very streaky data, even considering as erroneous, concerning the science of his time to build our discipline, like Galileo and his Copernican view of the universe, at a time when his telescope only magnified 3.5 times.
It's done.
Yes, I finished.
Just the conclusion.
Yes, the conclusion is good. So, all these detours are analogy. By means of transposition onto external tangible realities, they produce metaphors, the unconscious process at play, and allow traces and representation to be formed that will be used by the dream work. That is important, and I will stop with the dream work. Dream work, beyond the hallucinatory fulfillment of wishes, is a bath of regeneration, where the regeneration of the drive sources take place, which we all know in a very subjective way, a real wonder of awakening. Now I will tell directly the enigma of the science for psychoanalysts, for biologists, for neurologists, stay the nature of the libido, which is regenerated each night by the dream work. The enigma of our science is called libido. Nobody knows about her. Only some psychoanalysts attempt to define it. Nobody arrived. It's biological accents of the libido. Biological accents are sung by the poets. Elusive, it is at the foundation of our erotic desire and our wish to love. Our feeble reason hides the infinite from us, wrote Rimbaud.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. And now, quite intense, I have to say. Maybe more time was needed. Sorry, you're welcome. So now is your turn.
Yes. Thank you very much. First, my name is Rotraud de Klerk. It has two parts. The first name is a German name. The second one comes from Belgium. So it's a Dutch name. There is now, I have added my second first name, which is Helene, to make it easier on international audiences to pronounce my first name. because the first one, the German one, people have very many problems with it. I say it again, I pronounce it again. It is Rotkraut, and it involves to use your throat, which is a problem for some languages, especially for the Italians. Starting out with this, I'm a psychologist from training. I have studied in Frankfurt, in Germany. I have done my training, my psychoanalytic training at the Sigmund Freud Institute. But before I became a psychoanalyst, I studied literature, German and French literature. And for some reason which is too complicated to explain, I could not continue on that. And then when psychology in Frankfurt was enhanced very much by the arrival of psychoanalysis, personified by Alexander Mitscherlich. Some of you might know the name. He reintroduced psychoanalysis in Germany. I had the feeling I had found my field. I could combine a rather disciplined study of subjectivity with narration. Narration of fantasies, illusions, and this world that is very close to the unconscious. So this would be, first of all, the first step into this direction. I had some time in London because I was interested in the theories of Melanie Klein. I had the feeling that Freud fell short in some areas to do with aggression, early aggression, and I lived there, I lived in England, so I also had very good insight, not only in the theory of Melanie Klein, but also how it was practiced and also how it was institutionally handled with the controversies that you probably know about. Now, I have to say, the relationship between psychoanalysis and neuroscience, as I have experienced it here, is that it is still two islands in many ways, moving together in a very interesting way. But I, having had this experience between the Freudians and the Kleinians in London, I'm rather a fan of controversies. I have become a fan of controversies because it sharpens your mind and it sharpens your arguments for one and the other and makes you think. It makes you think about the external world and makes you think about the internal world and how they are connected. And so I see this endeavor of this conference today as a continuation of the age-old problem of mind and body relationship. But how are they connected and what can we learn from that? I tell you a story about Freud, and then I will not go much further in my talk, just a little story about Freud. In England, about 10 years after the turn of the century, or maybe it was a little later, there existed a society, and it was called the Society for Psychical Research, not psychoanalytic. Psychoanalysis did not exist in England before that and around that time. But the Society for Psychical Research was an agglomeration of people who believed there had to be more than physical reality. There had to be something eternal. The English church claimed it was God, but others said, well, there's no God. So they were interested in supernatural phenomena. Anyway, they wanted to prove that the psychical world had an influence on reality. And they thought for this purpose they could invite Freud to give them some evidence of this. And Freud said he could not come to London for reasons of his existence, but he wrote a letter. He wrote them about a case. And he wrote that he had treated a young woman who showed every sign of pregnancy. There we are again in this field of pregnancy, every sign of pregnancy, but she was not. And he told them the case, well, he wrote about it, he told them the case, and he
listed the physiological phenomena that this young woman had and told them, but in fact she was not pregnant. And this then was the start, really, or one of the important starts, beginnings of the entrance of psychoanalysis into the English medical world, because the evidence seemed so clear that the mind could have an effect on matter, the body, that the interest in psychoanalysis grew, and, well, I will spare you the rest, but you know that it became very, very influential, and the English school is one of the most advanced, I would say, in terms of discussing the problems between mind and body in the concept of unconscious fantasy. And this is another area, fantasy, yes, but then unconscious fantasy. And this is what we're still waiting for neuroscience to investigate, if I may say so. Yeah. How do you assess it? How do you find a methodology to get close to the unconscious fantasy that in fact has an effect on the body? So I close with this, my little speech. And
thank you, Helen, for this challenge. Actually, it could be a part of a next Congress, actually. Because the problem of, let's say, unconscious fantasy, unconscious or not conscious affects, all these areas are still to be debated in some way, to some extent. We say, as neuropsychanalysts, following Mark Solms, that affects are always conscious. But it's true that people are driven by something they don't know what it is about, but they act according to something, and they know what it is. So actually, it's something to still be clear, in my opinion. Anyway, I will end here, and thank you for your patience and resistance, and I hope you will be back home with some new ideas in your mind. Thank you all. See you tomorrow.